Welcome to the bridge. My name is Brandon. I'm joined by my friend Zach, and today we have an interesting album to talk about. Before we get into that, you got your green tea today, Zach?
No, I just finished some dinner not too long ago, and so I'm sipping on a nice cold dark beer.
Oh, nice. The name on it?
It's a German beer, so Sturte Becker is the
Okay,
name.
that's pretty
It's
good.
got a lot of these sort of coffee and caramel flavors. It's the first time I've ever tried it, and I have to say it is rather delicious. I'll be buying it again.
Nice, nice, nice. Some of my friends were talking about some German beers the other day that they like to have, so I can only imagine. So this week we picked an album by not a new artist per se, but a debut album from CARM. And I think CARM is pretty interesting. He is a horn player. But the reason he's interesting is he already has Grammy Award wins from featuring on a lot of albums and with a lot of artists you're probably familiar with. He's played with Paul Simon. He won the Grammy for Bon Iver's self-title album, which he featured on. He's also part of a sextet called Y Music. He's played for Sufjan Stevens. He even was played trumpet on Taylor Swift's recent album Evermore on Willow. So
Pretty
like,
prodigious guy, you could say.
yeah, and so he spent the last 15 years honing his craft, playing for other artists, and building up his IOUs. I think because he brought a lot of those artists in for this album. He's got a lot of
Mhm.
features on this.
Which are one of the more intriguing and compelling parts of the album. However, I will go ahead and say it already. The features for me are a bit of a mixed bag.
Sure.
They have soaring highs and then they have plunging lows.
I I wouldn't say so drastically. I think I would say that. I think that the this basic basis of building an album around your features and your horn playing and stuff is not a bad idea, but I think at times it takes away from the cohesiveness. I would say, but I don't know. I think they're all pretty good features. I think they're all good vocal performances and little adds to songs, such as the mouse feature,
Mouse on Mars.
most of Mars. Yeah. So before we get too far into our thoughts on the album off the bat, what had you heard of this guy beforehand?
No, I hadn't heard of him before, and yeah, we're reviewing this based on your recommendation, more or less,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't know anything about him, and then looked it up and seen that, yeah, like you had already mentioned, he was sort of part of people's bands. He was sort of like an album musician, I guess you could say. Yeah.
Right. Him and his sextet featured and played instrumentation on a lot of albums and features. So outside their own album working, which I believe they've gotten numerous awards for, even their debut for Classical Album of the Year. I believe that the year it came out.
Do you know what Paul Simon record it was that he played on?
I think he plays with them live.
Okay,
I
okay.
know, I know specifically reference that he plays like on the Boxer, right? But obviously he's not the original
No, yeah.
horn player on the Boxer. He's far too young. But he tours with Paul Simon. I imagine him
How
and
old?
this
How
guy.
old?
I am not sure. When I was looking up, I know that he started his career in the mid 2000s.
Okay.
Around the time Chicago's coming out, Bon Iver's coming out. So
Mhm.
assume he just graduated. I'd say he's in his like, yeah, he graduated in 2004. So assuming that he's somewhere in the mid 20s at that point, I'd say
Yeah.
he's pushing 40 right now.
So is he classically trained? Like, did he go to music school?
Yes, he did. He went to the Juilliard School.
Oh, okay, yeah, so a super prestigious school in New York.
Hmm. He featured there as a concerto soloist,
Uh-huh, okay.
and quickly after that went on tour with like Surf Jam and Rufus Wainwright National.
Okay, played with the National too. Yeah, wow. I mean, the guy's got chops. He's been around the block, that's for sure.
Right. So this is his debut album. So on his solo. effort. As mentioned, he has a sextet he plays part of called Y Music. That's amazing as well. And again, he's featured on all these albums. So this is his first solo outing. He's got a lot of these features on here. He's got Suf Jam. He's got Sharon Nova, Justin Vernon, also known as Bon Iver, Moussa Mars, and a few others as well. So he's kind of he's got this sign off of a lot of artists. You know what I'm saying? A lot of people respect him. They consider him really talented. So knowing all that, I was super excited to listen to this, even though I hadn't heard any of his Y Music stuff or any of his other stuff besides the features he probably had on those albums, which I hadn't heard of.
You unwittingly heard him play.
Right. So I had heard him play and didn't know it. And so this is his first solo album. And looking through the albums, this one piqued my interest the most.
It was a good recommendation by you. I really enjoyed listening to it, even if there are some problems that I have with the record.
There's a few issues, I think, but I think overall this was a interesting debut. How did your first listen go?
The first listen, my problem is that my least favorite track is the first track, and so my first listen, I really had to sort of push myself to get into the album because that Sufjan Stevens feature is just terrible in my opinion.
What is it that you didn't like about it?
It's just so cheesy, man. Like it's so like the lyrics in the first verse, he mentions angels, the light of the horizon, and then the refrain in the chorus is trouble and struggle, and it's super sentimental. And then the keys that play during the song are also sentimental. What sort of hooked me into the song a little bit was the French horn that plays.
Mm-hmm.
The French horn to me is a very lonesome sound. And this is a little bit of an aside, but I looked up what the name for French horn is in German because I write the notes in German, and it's called Waldhörner, and Wald is forest, and so it creates this image of a horn playing in the forest, sort of. Yeah, it conveys that idea of a lonesome sound. But the lyrics were just killed me, and then the way that they sing it, it's like there's two vocalists on the track, right? It's Sufjan Stevens, but then also because I looked up the lyrics on Genius, and then Genius listed Jake Lupin, who has a solo project called Lupin, I believe. I looked it up. I could be wrong.
I think I remember seeing the same thing.
He's the one who sings sort of the refrain in the chorus, trouble or struggle, and then Sufjan Stevens sings the rest. And they have it's not a harmonic, but it's Sufjan Stevens sings the main part, and then it's sort of lifted up with the gentle, angelic almost voice of Jake Lupin, and with the sentimental lyrics. God, it just sort of kills it for me.
That's interesting. I didn't listen a lot to the lyrics on this track, and it might have changed how I felt about it. Because I had come in this album knowing that this was a horn player, I was really interested in what I was going to be listening to, right? So I was paying attention to a lot of the composition on this track, which I enjoyed because I kind of had some throwaway comments on Sufjan's vocals being great. They're very wistful. He captures that like whisper vocal, very gentle atmosphere. I did have an issue with it. Is I felt like this was a bit derivative of a Sufjan song. This felt a lot more like a Sufjan Stevens track than defining this as a CARM track. And I didn't quite get a feel at when I started listening to this track and this album how the rest of the album was going to unfold. So I didn't really critique it that harsh at first, but after listening to the album in whole, I thought this track was a bit, and the album itself is a bit bookend on both sides by this issue. It's almost these transplant songs where I felt like they weren't CARM songs, they were Sufjan songs, or on the other side of it, Justin Vernon's song. But I enjoyed how the French horn was used in the song. Like it doesn't. He doesn't take the foreground with the horn or the brass. He usually he kind of fills the air in a lot of these tracks, but in this track as well, he fills the air with the horn sound. So there's like this tone constantly coming at you while there's like pianos playing. It's an interesting little cloud that he creates with the horn sections in his composition, where all the rest of the song just kind of like twiddles away on top of it. You know, I didn't think this was a bad song or cheesy, but again, I didn't really pay attention to the lyrics. I was listening more to the composition on it. So I concede that point. I can't say it wasn't too cheesy. I thought it was a bit too much of a derivative song of Surf Jam, and not something a little more at the gate definitive of the CARM's new debut effort.
Yeah, well, the song begins. It introduces the French horn
Right.
in the beginning of the song, and it does that quite often throughout the album.
Mm-hmm.
But so as soon as the song comes on, okay, it has the sort of the mark of CARM, you know. But
Mm-hmm.
then, of course, when you have someone as popular as Sufjan Stevens and his voice is super recognizable as well,
Mm-hmm.
as is Justin Vernon's.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, their presence definitely casts a big shadow over the rest of the song, and so then CARM's individual touch gets a little bit lost.
Yeah, I think so. And where he's part of these original sounds. Like he played on Bon Iver's self-titled. He's played on Sufjan's album. So like the part of the sound that he's derivative of is also his own sound. You know, he's part of that. So it's
Yeah,
a bit. It might be a bit harsh of me to critique it, but I would have liked to see him stand out a bit on his own in terms of his own individual sound.
yeah.
I
Well,
think he does a little better on other tracks,
mhm.
but I think the album is a little bookended with that issue.
Well, the thing is this: the album, as it progresses, my favorite section of the album comes in the middle, and then deep into the B side of the album, if you want to refer to it as B side, even though in my opinion it has the best tracks.
Mm-hmm.
But as the album progresses, he sort of sheds the skin of the contributions he's made to other artists' records and so on and so forth, and really develops his own voice, in my opinion. And so I found this song sort of strange. It was sort of strange to introduce the album on this song, I thought. But that was my first listen, and after listening to the album repeated times, there's certainly a progression that the album takes that makes sense, even though it still bothers me every time the song comes on.
How did you feel with the next track, "Soft Night"?
Soft Night. Okay, yeah. So again, it has that lonesome French horn, and it introduces the song again,
Mm-hmm.
as it did the previous time.
Mm-hmm.
But now he begins to introduce some electronic elements. Yeah,
Yep.
and it
Well,
sort of has.
yeah, he kind of sprinkles them in there in such a way that you might not even notice them a little bit in "Soft Night." I think it's the next track that he really just kind of throws it in your face.
Well, in my opinion, as the album progresses, we get more of this electronic touch, and the album is quite interesting for this reason, because it's very much like it incorporates analog instruments with horns and brass, and puts them into the electronic genre.
Right.
And anyways, this song, "Soft Night," it sort of progresses towards a loop, a sort of uplifting loop that, in my opinion, based on the sentimentality and the morose sound of the first song, is a step. It begins to step away from that and towards a different tone, a more
Right.
uplifting tone. Yeah.
This is the first song that kind of like starts the album, I think, and kind of like what I was more anticipating and kind of more what I enjoyed. This is a little bit of an atmospheric album at times, and I think this is one of the peak sleepy kind of songs was "Soft Night." a lot of just like somber listening, nighttime listening. That's how I kind of felt about it. It's the kind of music I felt very calming, and the horns. I love the horns, and I love him as a horn player, and that there's horns all over this album. So I was really interested in how he was going to incorporate that in a versatile kind of way, because I wanted to see all the different ways he would incorporate it. So Soft Night, I think, suffers a little bit of not doing a whole lot, but it's kind of like a palette. You know,
Yeah.
I think Soft Night kind of starts the album with a spacious kind of horn playing, a lot of like complementary horns underneath other instruments or filling up the air, like that he'll do on a lot of these tracks. But he does more other things, or he does other sounds on other tracks. But I think this Soft Night is a little simple to return to after you've heard the other tracks. But it was an interesting start, like a palette. You know, it was this kind of a canvas idea.
Well, I haven't thought about this until you brought it up, or until we started talking now. But I also noticed how the album sort of closes by return. It sort of returns to the tone that is set on Song of Trouble. However, what you're saying here about Soft Night, it's not necessarily sparse, but it's not a super dense track.
No.
You know, there's a lot of space, and you can hear all the elements quite well. However, if you refer to track 9, which is the penultimate track on the album, Scares Me Out, the most avant-garde track, it's the one that features Mouse on Mars.
Yes, that track is. Let's get to that track a little later, because I think this album builds that track a lot. Really well.
Yeah. But I just want to raise this point about maybe there's a relationship between Soft Night and Scarcely Out. They sort of function almost as counterpoints. With Soft Night being a light introduction to the electronic elements on the album, and then the whole album sort of builds towards this big climactic payoff and Scarcely Out that is very frenetic and full of all kinds of erratic energy.
I think it's the third track, Nowhere, that the production really threw me for a loop. I wasn't expecting to hear any kind of electronic influence on this album. It's not really what I was anticipating. And this one starts with like a wall of grimy bass. You know, it just, everything has like sludge covered all over it as soon as this track starts. And I was just like, what? Like, it just really, like, I had no idea that this was coming. And that's not an insult. Like, I enjoyed that like murkiness that it started with. And then like it kind of develops. I noted that the guitar in this song reminds me almost of like a Pink Floyd kind of a chord. So I don't know if you picked up on that as well, but it was very familiar to me anyway. And the only thing closest I get to is like kind of sounds like a little bit of a Pink Floyd-y structure with the guitar there. They bring in the horn in, and I'm always surprised every now and then he brings in the new horn sound from somewhere. And I always forget that there's going to be horn on this record for some reason.
Yeah.
I really liked this one. The driving drums near the end was really good. There's a lot of life on this one. This was like my first highlight, was Nowhere.
Okay. For me, it was just I could see where the album was going at this point. I didn't take a deep interest in it, but it was another step towards where I thought the album would take more shape. Like at this point, like the album sort of starts off in this, if we take the position that the album really kicks off with Soft Night, it's almost a little bit skeletal, and then he sort of adds meat to the skeleton as the songs progress. And so this track was, for me, it's not a bad track, but not anything particularly extraordinary or noteworthy.
Okay. I'm going to disagree. I really think that this track stands out on the album. It's mostly because of the production techniques that he used on this and how different it sounds from anything that was coming up to this point. And really, nothing really kind of gets back to this kind of feeling of a song, I think, until the sixth track.
Invisible Walls.
Yeah, but that's fine. I think I still enjoy that song.
To be honest, maybe it was just my first impression. It was after I listened to the album a couple times, I started selecting the tracks that really grabbed my attention, and I really like Invisible Walls, but I never drew the connection like you did between Nowhere and Invisible Walls. So yeah, fair
Uh,
point.
how'd you? Let's go on to the next track. The next one is another feature track, but I'm not familiar. I wasn't anyway. Familiar with Georgia Hubley and Ira Kaplan. I'm sorry if I butchered those names. But they're part of Yola Tango, which I had a little listen to, and I enjoyed kind of what I listened to. There's a little bit of a noise pop going on with them, and they're like started back in the 80s. And I know the woman here is a percussionist, and I watched her on the drums as she's like 60 years old, going to town.
Okay,
And
well,
she was so she really interested me. I thought this was I'm not going to say this was a great feature, because honestly it was a little lackluster. I thought it was pretty rudimentary for what I went and heard from them and their solo work. I wish there was more of that in this song.
yeah, I'm familiar with one of their albums. It's the one that has Autumn Sweater on it. I think it came out in 1998.
Mm-hmm.
But that band Yola Tango, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they've got a huge discography, and so I'm familiar with that one album, but I haven't listened to much else from them. And it's a good album, but yeah, like the feature on this song doesn't it's not anything that makes me want to return to them anytime soon, per
Right.
se.
I enjoyed like more what I went and searched up of that artist than I did this track. So it kind of served two masters. It kind of introduced me a bit to Yolo Tango, but it wasn't a bad song. This isn't a terrible track or anything, but I just thought it kind of fell to the wayside a bit of the other tracks.
Musically, I thought it was pretty cool. Like the horns I found on this track were very drawn out
Mhm.
during the course, and there's a bridge section where he really draws out the horn, and also the keyboard that's playing, it juxtaposes very well with the long drawn out horn, because the keyboard it's playing almost in a nervous way. It's got a very fast and sped up tempo,
Okay.
and I always like that when I have two opposite sounds playing off each other.
I was very accepting of the electronic flares that he was doing.
Yeah.
I thought they were a really good idea at this point, because he was getting a little predictable with his horn. Kind of like to me, it was just kind of a track that existed. So going out of that and into our after hours, which had a pretty heavy electronic warble going on. There's a vocal sample in there. It's kind of like hip hop kind of influenced on this album. A slow fly, it's very heavy and cloudy. The bass was sludgy, and then the horns come in and fill it up. Like this song is I really enjoyed this song as well, and I think this is somewhere you were mentioning how you kind of like the middle to the B sides. I think After Hours is where that starts for me. I think that little power section of the album starts at After Hours to me.
Yeah, like up until this point, the album is, I'm not gonna say mediocre, but it sort of it's on a bit of an average trajectory, you
Yeah,
know?
I would say it's kind of average at this point. I was enjoying the horns and excited to see how he was as a composer, and listening to the way he structured songs and where he was going to put his horns in, and how he was going to grasp his sound. That was really interesting to me as a concept going into this album. And by the time I got to After Hours, I had gotten I've been listening to like 15 minutes of this album by now. And so I'm like, okay, I kind of get where this is going to. And I wasn't really like the initial excitement had kind of worn off. And it's like, okay,
Yeah,
now you got to hook me with something else now.
yeah. But by the time Already Gone's over, the curiosity of the horns have sort of worn off at that point.
Right.
you're sort of saying to yourself, okay, I get it. I understand your point of view, where you're coming from. Now,
So what else do you got?
shock me a little bit. Like, let's sort of turn the dial a little bit. Like, you have a very unique sound. Let's kind of, I hate to say experimental. I don't like that word,
Sure,
but
but I know where you're going. Yeah, experiment a
yeah,
little bit.
become a little more progressive with your sound.
And I think he does. I think this, like, he starts with obviously I think Nowhere has these effects on it. And it's kind of interesting as an introduction. After Hours continues with some more ideas in this vein, and I think they're different enough and compelling enough that at the point in the album where he needs to start defining himself, he does
Mhm.
so.
Yeah, and you said this track really sticks out, and I picked up on the point that it's the first track actually that doesn't open with the French horn,
Okay.
and it opens with the wobbly, fluttering bass that you mentioned.
Right, right. It sounds like something thrown through a computer, and it's just like, or someone yelling into a fan, you know?
Yeah, yeah, exactly, yeah. And then shortly after that, shortly after the song begins, maybe 10, 15 seconds, instead of a French horn this time, it sounds like a foghorn that plays.
Oh, okay.
And that's what it reminded me of. You wanna know what it reminded me of? I'm not sure if you've seen the movie The Lighthouse with Robert
I
Pattinson.
I've seen clips, but not I haven't seen the whole thing.
Okay, well, even if you've seen the trailer, the foghorn is a very big motif in that album, and foghorn, it brought me back to watching that movie. And the foghorn, yeah, really, along with the bass, sort of brought a new energy to the song. It sort of caught my attention. It arrested me a little bit, and I said,
Right,
"Okay, I gotta stop. You know, put my focus on the album now because something new is happening."
right. Um, so probably what's my favorite song on the album is "Invisible Walls." How did you feel about that one?
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier. It has this distortion effect. It's very sludgy.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's sort of thick. It's got this very it almost functions like an interlude and has these almost it almost sounds like someone screaming somewhere buried behind all the heavy sound. On the
I have written here that it opens with a wailing horn. So yeah, I get that screaming kind of sensibility from it as well.
Yeah, yeah, that's actually what I have written here. I said distorted bass, but that's wrong. It's sort of distorted horn, and the distorted horn is what sounds like someone screaming.
Right, and that horn builds through the song. Like this song is kind of perfect for me. It's a simple concept of a song. It just builds from the beginning to end, and there's a climax near the end. You know, it's like a little story. It opens with this wailing horn. It slowly starts building, and it quickens, and it opens up with this strummed instrument and some other distorted sound I couldn't quite, uh, define. I couldn't figure out what it was, but there's some sort of something that's gone through some reverb and some distortion that was a little confused me what it was. And then it just hits this peak where everything crescendos and it's going crazy and everything's loud and this thick wall of sound is coming at you. It settles out and everything's kind of got a circular motion as it comes out of this. Everything's like swirling and it's like there's a sense that you're being dragged away from Kansas in a tornado.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just like I really enjoyed the song actually. Like I thought it was a great build, a good. I think if he could find his sound within this bubble that he explores here in Invisible Walls, I think he'll see a big fan out of me.
Yeah. Well, I think you know, part of the reason why the track's so powerful is because more or less up until this point in the record, the midpoint in the record, you've been treated with these soft, lonesome, uh, almost dreamy French horns.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden he puts this song in the middle of the album. And what does he do with the horns? He distorts them and then he cranks up the volume as loud as the album ever gets, and then lets it play for 5 minutes, which is the
Right.
second longest track on the album.
Right. No, I really enjoyed this. A spoiler: this is going to be my toe-in song. I think this was the highlight of the album. Was Invisible Walls, right here in the middle, the sixth track. I think the album builds to this track super well. The tracks lead to this track. I mean,
Hold on a second. You said this would be your toe-in track.
yeah, this is the track I think people should, if they're gonna. You could argue that this is a bit maybe putting your toe into the deep end a little bit. After Hours or Nowhere might be it, or an interesting, more encompassing sound. But I just think that this is the peak of his skill as a composer comes in Invisible Walls, I think.
Well,
and I would like to sample that.
Don't you think that if you went into this song blind without the context of everything that comes before it, it would lose some of its dramatic impact?
No, you're right. Yeah, you're right. This is kind of an album. There's a lot of stuff that I think you need to build into, which that's a conceit of having toe-in songs. This is kind of an album that more lends to you listening beginning to end than it does encourage picking out random songs to see what it's like.
Yeah, I think it's definitely an album that, especially on your first listen, from beginning to end, and preferably in one sitting, which, I mean, I always listen to albums in one sitting. I don't like splitting them up into pieces, because that's not the way they were intended to be listened. But it's definitely an album where you need to understand what he's doing by listening to it from front to back. The organization of the album is very intentional.
Mm-hmm.
And I think after that, can you then decide, okay, these are the songs that sort of make the most sense of the progression of the album to me? And then
you could probably pick out 3 or 4 tracks that kind of, if you want to like abridge the album a bit. And I think you could definitely do that. Soft Night, Nowhere, After Hour, Invisible Walls. Actually, no. Cut it After Hours, put Invisible Walls, and go to Slantwise. I think. No, not Slantwise. I'm thinking of we're thinking of Scarcely Out. That's the one thing.
Scarcely Out, yeah. Well, that's interesting because you leave out the track that comes after Invisible Walls, which is my favorite vocal performance on the album.
I'm not going to disagree with her voice. But I thought we're talking about Shara Nova, who is from My Brightest Diamond.
And she features on the song Tap.
Yes, Tap is the next song. Get a little ahead of ourselves there. I think she has a lovely voice, and I got a lot of FKA Twigs vibes from this track. The vocals were lovely. There's nothing wrong with them, but I was more compelled with some of her solo work when I looked her up. Listened to a track or two. I thought she had very distinct vocals and was compositionally really talented. I'm sure she had a hand in the composition of this album because she's also in that field. I don't know that for a fact though. But I just kind of thought this also was similar to Already Gone to me. I thought this was just kind of there. I didn't really have a super complaint about it. It was kind of a wispy song. After listening to Invisible Walls and After Hours, this kind of felt like a regression to me. I felt like stepping back a little too much, and I ended up thinking this was my least favorite track
on the whole album.
Yeah.
Okay, wow, that's sort of shocking to me because it's not my favorite track on the album, but I really like it, and I really like it because it comes after Invisible Walls, which is so loud and just heavy and in your face. And then this song, it has 3 elements more or less: the horn, some electronic textures, and then her voice. And she has a great vocal performance. Her voice reminded me of Florence and the Machine.
Yes,
And
I get that comparison as well.
Yeah, and she can sing high, and then she can go an octave even higher.
Mm-hmm.
And she really does that on this song. And I checked out some of her solo work, and I didn't find the same vocal performance really. That I didn't find the same range on any of the songs that I listened to. But
I didn't go deep. I only heard a few songs to get my palate wet for what it was that she offered this song.
Mhm.
I was more interested, honestly, with her composition work with some of their songs and how she structured them. I thought
Mhm.
she was really talented there in that degree.
Uh,
No, I'm not taking anything away from her vocals. I think her vocals are great, but honestly, it's the vocal tracks on this album that I like the least.
that you like the least, and you want to know something? I can totally agree, except this song. This
Okay.
is the pearl of all the vocal performances on the album. I thought the instrumentation and her voice just came together so well. It had this sort of beautiful etherealness to it, which contrasted very well with coming out of Invisible Sounds.
Okay.
And in a way, the next two songs that come, it sort of provides a little bit of a palate cleanser.
The actor Invisible Walsh mean?
Well, after Invisible Walls, then Tap comes. It's sort of like a palate cleanser, and then we sort of have to buckle in for the next two tracks before we get to the end of the album because
I would also say Slantwise was a bit of a palate cleanser. I think Tap and Slantwise have very similar aesthetics. I thought Slantwise was a bit redundant. I thought it didn't really serve a huge purpose here. It's fine, it's a little atmospheric, but a little too passive for me. I thought after hearing these ideas on Nowhere, After Hours, and Invisible Walls, and I thought he was going to go in this more experimental electronic place with his horn playing. I was really interested in seeing like this growth and branching out of the sound, but it felt like instead he kind of brought Slantwise back to Soft Night. You know, Slantwise just felt like something back to the palette. You know, that blank canvas.
okay, that's funny. We have pretty divergent opinions throughout this album because I have to say I thought this was an interesting song because you know electronic music it has an electronic bass, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just it's a staple. It's part of the aesthetic.
Mm-hmm.
However, Slantwise, he's using drums. He's using actual percussion, no?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
I
I
think
thought
so. I can't say for sure.
it sounds a lot like drums to me because it stood out to me as soon as I put on the track, and I thought it added like more of an analog bass sound to what is an electronic album, I guess you could say, even though he has that classical background and obviously brings in the horns and stuff. And I just thought it was another part of we began the discussion talking about CARM's personal touch on his solo debut,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought Slantwise was an example of him bringing part of his analog background in from his classical training and use of horns and sort of turning the electronic genre on its head a little bit by using real drums and actual percussion
Mm-hmm.
on an electronic track. I thought it was kind of revolutionary.
Okay. Okay.
Not that it's just this element of the song. Not saying that the song is the best on the album or anything like this, but I thought the song Slantwise, contrary to what you were saying about it being a regression, I thought it had a purpose and was progressive in its musical ideas.
Okay. No, I can see that. I can see that. I think at this point, after being so intrigued and excited through the ideas of Nowhere, After Hours, and Invisible Walls, those being my favorite tracks up to this point,
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't excited to kind of see him pull back on it, you know, and kind of build back up later. So I'm kind of curious how you felt about the next track. I have a suspicion I know how you felt. Scarcely Out, which features Mouse on Mars, which is an electronic duo. Uh,
Yeah, so I'm gonna maybe provide some context for Mouse on Mars because I'm a pretty big Kraftwerk fan, and Kraftwerk are a German electronic group from Dusseldorf that essentially were pioneers of electronic music with their album Autobahn that came out in 1974, I believe, though I could be wrong. It may have came out in 1972.
That's a fantastic record, by the way.
Yeah, it's a great record. We listened to it together. And anyways, interestingly enough, Mouse on Mars also come from Dusseldorf in Germany. And so, of course, they have this very strong connection and background to the scene in which Kraftwerk created in West Germany. And even though the Mouse on Mars are based in Berlin now, they come from this background of electronic music that began with Kraftwerk, and they've been making records since 1994. Their debut record is called Volvaland. I encourage everyone to go check it out. And they have a new record actually coming out this year called AAI. I can't remember exactly what the acronym stands for, but it's coming out in February. Perhaps I may be able to convince you to review it on the show. We'll maybe talk about that when we're not recording.
Yeah, sure. I'm always. It depends on what releases alongside it, really. Well, that's the only thing we'll see.
But it was interesting because I looked at the most recent work, and they actually have features from Justin Vernon on their record, and they also have a host of other features as well, which include rappers, singer-songwriters from Ireland, Justin Vernon, as I mentioned before, and so on and so forth. And so they're an incredibly diverse electronic duo, and they really do push the boundaries on what electronic music can do, and they're not really limited. They are not limited to any genre. They're very much similar to how this record pulls from different areas and incorporates different instruments. They're the exact same. And so this song, it has the horn, it has piano keys, and
just
then
just a moment there. The acronym that you're talking about, AAI, is Artificial Authentic Intelligence.
Okay. Did you just look it up? The
Yes, I
album
did.
name?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So everyone, keep your eye out for that, even if we don't review.
But yeah, as you were saying, the horns.
Yeah. So this track has CARM's horns, but similar to maybe what you were saying about the Sufjan Stevens song, the Mouse on Mars sort of take over.
Yeah, this song feels the most different of everything else on the album.
Yeah, it's definitely the most avant-garde song on the album. There's no doubt about it.
I got the feeling, like, I get a lot of visuals when I listen to the song. This song was really peppery. It had a lot to it. It kind of felt like 1,000 scuttering ants, or time lapse of New York. Everything's going fast and rapid, and there's lots of syncopated beats, and it's really interesting. I thought this track was a compelling. I'm not quite sure about the Mouse on Mars influence, or how much this is derivative of their sound, but I thought that this, in terms of the feature, I thought this was the best feature on the album, and that it kind of fit into the narrative of the sound evolution throughout the album as kind of the track that kind of pulls it all together.
Yeah, this song is like putting your head on a swivel.
Mm-hmm.
The song is constantly changing, and it's also maybe one of the faster tempo songs on the album.
Mm-hmm.
You can compare it to, in my opinion, it reminded me, even though it's far more, it's far more dense. It brought me back to the vigor that you get on After Hours and Invisible Walls.
Yes, this felt like the natural conclusion on the album. This
Yeah,
felt to me like what I a little bit spoiled. What I thought should have been the ending track.
I agree.
It's textured, which someone asked me the other day what that meant, and it's just like something that's not necessarily a melody or a beat, but like something that adds a little more to the song by terms of soundscape. That's just what we mean when we say textured. So it's textured and electronic, and there's a lot of syncopated beats, a lot of things off rhythm with the beats, and string hits on every other beat. It's just a wild, cacophonous chaos of a song.
Yeah, it's incredibly chaotic. And when I looked into their music, especially their most recent output, yeah, like they incorporate the piano keys, and their sound sort of plays into what CARM is doing on this record. Like they incorporate analog sounds with electronic music. And so I think the collaboration between the two was fantastic. I'm curious to see if CARM actually features on their upcoming release.
That'd be nice. Every horn that I hear on the album now, I was like, "Is that him? Is that my boy?"
Is he sneaking around there in the background, tooting his horn?
Is there anything else that you want to say in this before we went on to what was the closing track?
No, that's all. That's all I have to say on the track. Except that even though it's the most out there track on I think it's the one I like the best. It's the one that makes me the most excited.
Right. So you'd say that was your favorite on the album?
Yeah, that song and After Hours and Invisible Walls. Those tracks are, I think, for most people who listen to the album would say, yeah, those are the ones that stand out the most.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. How did you think about Bon Iver's ending song here, ending feature on Land?
So I sort of, stuck it to Sufjan Stevens and his morose atmosphere on the opening track. And then you get it again here on the last track, Land. However, I think production-wise, it's a little more interesting. And there's this section, and I guess it sort of functions like a bridge. And they bury his Justin Vernon's vocals in some sort of sound effect, and it almost comes out. It begins to sound like an echo. You can barely understand what he's saying, and it had this like ghastly sound to it. And I thought it sort of played into parts of the sound on the album. It reminded me of Tap a little bit, and the screaming sounds that you hear on what track was that? Yeah, Invisible Walls. It sort of brought me back to that a little bit, and I thought that was enough to make the track stand out over Song of Trouble. But other than that, it really brings us back to this regrettable place that Sufjan Stevens creates for us at the beginning of the album.
I agree with what you're saying. I didn't write any notes on this song. I listened to the Bon Iver album a few months ago. This song fits on that album you wouldn't even notice. This is like a B-side to that album. This was so derivative of that album that I just couldn't care. I just couldn't care about this song. It just sounded like a Bon Iver song that I'd already heard 7 versions of over the course of his discography himself. Like this felt so unneeded on this album that I just really didn't like it.
Yeah, I mean it was a bit of a story point to end on, like you said, especially with Scarcely Out. It was that would have been such an exclamation point on the record. And then we returned back to this sappy mood, more or less. And even though you want to know something, if you look at the statistics, I use Spotify, but I'm sure Apple Music and all the other places where people stream music, the statistics are probably the same. The Song of Trouble and Land are the most popular songs that are being streamed from this album by far.
That doesn't surprise me at all. I think that's kind of their point, though, and why they're on this album is the reason why we chose to review it, why it was so interesting to us, is he had these features from Bon Iver and he had these features from Sufjan. These were like a lot of I'll say sponsors for this album. They really kind of gave it their blessing, and so that was really what brings you into this album is these features. And okay, this guy, he's got the seal of approval from these people that I respect, and he's got the Grammy Award from the Bon Iver self-titled album. But in the end, it's this cruel irony that the same reason I listened to this album ended up being the worst part of the album.
Yeah, it is the cruel irony, that's for sure. And the thing is this, I am not so I don't know how much of an influence he had the Bon Iver projects and on
Mhm.
Sufjan Stevens projects.
Right.
And so, I mean, is it fair to really be harsh on CARM because the songs that feature Sufjan Stevens and Justin Vernon sound like Sufjan Stevens songs and Bon Iver songs, when
Right.
really he contributed a lot to the sounds that feature on those artists' records.
Yeah, but even that's not really the core issue I think I have with them. Is while those are sounds that he could equally have been responsible for, I don't see the point in regurgitating them here. They feel like they come off almost like a resume. You know, these are my references. Give them a call, Bon Iver and Suf Jam, and they
Yeah,
bookend the album and they kind of make you listen to the album. But I think in terms of the overall quality of the album, that this album would have been better if you cut both of them off.
yeah, but I mean, like you said, if the point was for these features to function as a hook, it worked on us. So I mean,
Yes.
it's work on everybody else too.
Yeah, there's an argument to be made there. He got
As
what
a,
he wanted it from it, right?
yeah, as a marketing scheme, it worked great, but as far as the music goes, it takes away from the rest of the album.
It almost feels like they should be bonus tracks, or they should have both started the album, or they should have been more features used a little more experimentally. You know, pull Bon Iver more into that electronic area, and have him perform on something that fit the structure of your album more.
Mhm.
Same with Suf Jam. Suf Jam was a fine opener because this is where I came from, you know, and then your evolution of sound as you go through the album. I would have even like I didn't mind Surf Jam Stevens starting the album out in that regards. Like it kind of gives you kind of like a palette, like Soft Night. Those are like these kind of palette songs. I didn't find it as cheesy. Again, I didn't pay attention to lyrics all that much in those tracks.
Mhm.
Um,
I just
I would have seen the Bon Iver been a better start, maybe, if you just started with the Bon Iver, because the Bon Iver song is not bad. It's just redundant and like, just go listen to his self-titled. Go listen to For Emma. Like, there's better songs on there that do the same thing. It's like I don't know what the point of the song was. It's just kind of to say, oh, I was on that album. I won a Grammy with Bon Iver. Let's put another song together that sounds like what we did there. It's like you kind of did this whole album where like you're building up to Scarcely Out, and you go through Invisible Walls, and you do these creative ideas, and then to kind of go back and say, I like Bon Iver, let's do a track together that it doesn't really add to the album, in my opinion. It's just kind of like almost like flaunting.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying. When I listened to it, I thought, oh, sort of sense of balance, by closing by return. But
Yeah,
at the
it
same
bookends with two very similar songs.
yeah, but at the same time, I can see what you mean. It may be disingenuous to place it as a yeah.
It feels easy, in my opinion. I think he didn't use Bon Iver's feature work on this album to the level I wish he had.
Yeah, I mean, like, no offense about Bon Iver or anything, and to any Bon Iver fans, but
No, this is
I
a
mean,
fine track, naked. Inside the context of this album, it's a fine track. If you like Bon Iver, you'll like this song.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But it's
It's
just
just
like same old, same old.
yeah, it doesn't fit the album really. Like
Mm-hmm.
after after we move on from the Sufjan Stevens song, like you said, there's an evolution of sound that takes place, and then he sort of yeah, like bows back down to where it is he began, and sort of like defeats the purpose a little bit, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a kind of a misfire on his usage of Justin Vernon.
But yeah, like I don't know where else you'd put it on the album, honestly.
If anything, you put it at the beginning, but honestly, I just wish he had redone this song, made it a little more interesting, a little more experimental, and had it fit its ending status.
Well, I think like if you took Justin Vernon's vocals and then incorporate it into a song like Invisible Walls, really loud and high decibels, that could be interesting, especially
Yes.
where he uses in the mid section of this song, the production creates this echo effect with Justin Vernon's voice that would play well into some of the more loud, aggressive songs on the album. You know, maybe that was something they, like you said, it's just a little bit easy.
Let's not call it toe-in songs this time. Let's say, what are your recommendations? What were your favorite songs on this album?
I mean, my favorite songs definitely After Hours. The run of songs from 5 to 9, After Hours, Invisible, Tap, Slantwise, Scarcely Out. This is the peak of the album. It really hits its stride, and it knows where it's going and what it wants to do, and it sounds fresh. It sounds new.
Mm-hmm.
And of those songs, I would say if you're going to listen to just one song, check out After Hours.
Okay. I can agree with that. I'd say give Invisible Walls or Nowhere a try. I was a little more favorable to the beginning of the album than you were, and not really vibing with Tap and Slantwise. I had kind of a mirror vision on this album. But I'd say After Hours, Invisible Walls, great tracks to go. Some of my favorite tracks were Scarcely Out, Invisible Walls, After Hours, Nowhere, South Night. Those were kind of like the songs I enjoyed the most on the album. Who would you recommend this album to? Who do you think would get the most of this?
I mean, if you're an electronic music fan, definitely check it out. But definitely electronic music fans. Definitely check it out if you like electronic music. There's definitely another audience for this type of music, though, don't you think?
Yeah, I think people are interested in like what I was interested in going into this, about how he would incorporate the features, how he would compose the songs, and how he would stamp his identity as a solo artist. I think are really compelling. And with all his stamp of approval, all these other songs, I think if you have heard him before and unknowingly, he's an interesting artist to listen to and give a little taste. I think people who are familiar with Sufjan and Bon Iver and are fans of horns in general and like spacey music and atmospheric music, and some don't mind electronic touch and flares. I think we'll find a lot in this album. It's hard to. There's a lot of instrumentals on this album too. If you're not really a instrumental listener and you're more of a vocal heavy listener, you're probably not going to like this album all that much. But if you enjoy your instrumentals and you enjoy following on composition and listening to the textures and the sounds it comes through with, I think you'll find a lot of merit in this.
I would suggest post-rock fans check it out, because even though post-rock, has a lot more chords and stuff like that, they'll probably like the horns, the analog sound of the horns, and there's so much instrumentals on the track. I could see post-rock fans sort of warming up to it.
So what would you rate this walking away from
it? Before I give my rating, as a debut, how do you consider the album? Was it a good debut, mediocre?
As a debut, I think there are some ups and downs on this as a debut. I understand we've talked about the inclusion of people like Bon Iver and Sufjan in terms of the marketing strategy, but in terms of like define yourself as a player, a solo player and a solo composition, I think there were some conceits made that damaged the overall quality of the album.
Yeah, so you think on a sophomore release, he's still going to be in this process of discovering his own voice as a solo artist?
I think this is going to be someone who is going to shake it off and come back with something really, really good. I'm excited to see where this goes. I think there's a little bit of needing to shake off a little bit of that debut album kind of decision makings and getting his name out there and noticed. That I think when he gets more into the realm where he can really let go and just ride on his own merits, I think he'll do a lot better. And that might be his sophomore, and it might be his third release, you know. But I kind of feel a really good album coming out of this guy. I can tell he's really talented. Obviously he's talented. I just don't. I think he made some mistakes in putting this album together, and I kind of walk away giving this a 6.
A 6, yeah. It's hard for me to give it a 6 because the songs that I did like, I liked a lot, and I mean, for lack of a better word, I shit all over "Song of Trouble," and I stand by that. I don't like it, and I never will. And "Land" is, mediocre. But in between those two songs, I think there's really something special here, and it may take a little bit of time to get there, but considering it's this guy's debut release, I think he really has the opportunity to be a unique voice in electronic music, and I'm not even sure if there's not really a name for this for the music that is on this record.
Right. I think he has this ability to play in those two worlds and merge them together and create something really interesting. And there's times on this album where he does that, and it makes me really excited. It's just the inconsistencies, I think, some of the lulls. You know, I only really like about half the album. The other half is like good, fine, and there's a few tracks I'm not a fan of. And so when I think of all that together, you know, in terms of 5 being like an average kind of whatever release, this is a bit better than that, but I still think he has places to go, places to grow, and good music to write yet.
Yeah, and I agree with everything that you said, but for me, the unique quality to a sound, like I can't really find this type of music. You know, Mouse on Mars, a type of band like this is maybe the closest I can get to a band who sort of feels like they're on the frontier, like they've got the one step into the future. And so for that reason, I've got to give the album a 7. It's sort of a cautionary 7 because like I said there are some blunders, especially at the front and back of the record, and some tracks are just nothing extraordinary. But when the album really hits its stride, man, it really grabs my attention. And there's tracks on here that I'm going to be returning to for quite a while. And just to round out the sort of a response to what you were saying, in his future releases, I just hope that his contributions to the work of other artists don't result in him struggling to find his voice because he has, these popular features on his records. And I'm certain that his next record will more than likely incorporate a number of features the way this one has. And so, I just hope that, he doesn't let the star power of other artists that he's worked for overshadow his own voice, because his own voice for me is very curious, and I'm excited to see what he comes up with next.
All right. Well, we'll be back next week with another album. We haven't decided what it will be yet. I don't know if you've had anything in mind yet, but I'm excited. I really enjoyed listening to this album, even though I did give it a fairly low score. I think relative to some of my other scores, I did enjoy this, and I see a lot of potential in it. But I also think it's a little bit passable at this point. But yeah, we'll be back next week. I say give it a listen. Give some of the core songs we mentioned here. Listen, if anything we talked about piqued your interest, or our complaints don't seem to vibe with your palette of music taste, give this a listen. And let us know how you thought.